Welcome to the Brady Bunch of Autism, your source for family, parenting, and all things autism and special needs. Created by our family for your family. Live from the Ed Asner Family Center. And now your hosts, Nava and Matt Asner.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Brady Bunch of Autism. Today's episode is a little different. Usually we're talking about our lives in real time, raising kids, navigating autism, trying to keep the wheels on while everything's moving at once. But today I want to go backwards for a minute, way back, before the center, before the advocacy, before I had any language for what I was going through. I want to read you something that I've been working on. It's a part of something about my childhood, about growing up feeling like I didn't quite fit in. Like I was missing something everyone else seemed to have. It's about school, about shame, about the things kids carry that no one sees. And fair warning, this one's a little raw. But if you've ever felt like the kid who doesn't get it, or you love someone who's been made fun of or made to feel a certain way, I think this might resonate. So here we go. Walking into a new school is a rite of passage. For most kids, it's a mix of nerves and excitement, new friends, new teachers, maybe even a chance to reinvent yourself a little. For me, it felt more like stepping into a battlefield with no armor and no map. Would I make it out alive? More importantly, would I make it in alive? By the time I reached fourth grade, school had already started to feel like something I needed to survive rather than something I could participate in. The mornings were the worst. There was a heaviness that would settle into my chest before I even got out of bed, like my body knew what was coming before my mind had fully caught up. I wasn't a loner, that's the strange part. I had friends, good ones. I could laugh, I could connect. On the playground I was fine, more than fine, sometimes. But the moment I stepped into the classroom, everything shifted. The rules changed. Inside those four walls, there was a structure I couldn't seem to follow. Instructions that didn't land the way they were supposed to. Concepts that slipped through my fingers no matter how hard I tried to grab onto them. And every time I failed to keep up, it chipped away something inside me. By the time my parents sat down with my fourth grade teacher, Ms. Bosco, I already had a sense of what she was going to say. You don't need to hear the words when you've been living them all year. Still, hearing them out loud was something else entirely. Matt just doesn't get it. It wasn't said cruelly. That almost made it worse. There was no anger in her voice, no frustration even, just resignation, like she had reached the end of the road with me and there was nothing left to try. That moment didn't just define how she saw me, it started to define how I saw myself. Because if the person whose job it was to teach me believed I couldn't learn, what did that say about me? The truth is, somewhere deep down, I knew I wasn't stupid. There were flashes, moments where something clicked, where I felt sharp, capable, even ahead of the curve, but those moments were drowned out by the constant reinforcement of failure. Confidence doesn't disappear all at once. It erodes quietly, consistently, until one day you realize it's gone. My parents made the decision to keep me in public school for fifth grade. Looking back, I think it came from hope more than anything else. Hope that maturity would fix it, that maybe I just needed another year, that whatever wasn't working would somehow correct itself if we just stayed the course. Hope is a powerful thing, but it isn't always enough. Fifth grade arrived, and with it came Mr. Tiemann. Mr. Tiemann was the kind of teacher you remember whether you want to or not. He had presence, authority, a kind of theatrical command of the room. There were moments when he was engaging, even inspiring. Moments when you leaned in because you wanted to hear what he was going to say next. And then there were the other moments. He believed in control, in discipline, in the idea that pressure, sometimes public, sometimes physical, could shape behavior. Paddling was still something he practiced, a holdover from another era that somehow still existed in ours. I managed to avoid that particular rite, but the threat of it hung in the air like a storm cloud. What he really excelled at, though, was something else entirely: public exposure. Every so often he would hand out progress reports, not privately, not discreetly, but out loud, one by one, as he moved around the room. Peter, you're getting a B. Susie, an A. Randy, a C. Each announcement landed differently depending on who you were. For some kids it was validation, for others a warning. For me it was dread building with every name that wasn't mine. Then he got to me. Matt, you're getting an F. There it was, not a surprise, not really, but hearing it declared like that, broadcast to the room, sealed with certainty, it hit differently. Danny Gold, my best friend, laughed. Not because he wanted to hurt me, not because he thought I deserved it. He laughed because that's what kids do in those moments. It was reflex, survival. If you're laughing, you're not the one being laughed at. Mr. Tiemann turned on him instantly. Don't laugh, he said, his voice cutting through the room. You helped. And just like that, the humiliation expanded. It wasn't just mine anymore. It was shared, amplified, made into something bigger than a grade on a piece of paper. I remember sitting there trying to disappear, trying to shrink into my desk, into the floor, into anything that would take me out of that moment. That was the year I started to believe the story that had been written about me, that I didn't get it, that I couldn't get it, that maybe I never would. At home, things were shifting. My father's instinct was to push harder, to find a solution that looked like discipline, structure, correction. Military boarding schools entered the conversation, places where order was enforced and weakness was not tolerated. In his mind, it made sense. If I wasn't responding to the environment I was in, maybe I needed a more rigid one. My mother saw it differently. She didn't see defiance. She didn't see laziness. She saw a kid who was trying and failing in a system that didn't know how to meet him where he was. So she started looking elsewhere. Schools for kids with learning differences. Places that didn't measure intelligence by how quickly you could absorb information in one specific way. Places that understood that struggling didn't mean incapable. Eventually she found one. And then she did something that changed the trajectory of my life. She fought for it. She pushed back against the idea that I needed to be fixed through punishment. She insisted that I needed to be understood instead. That decision didn't just give me a new school. It gave me a chance to rewrite the story I had started to believe about myself. I didn't know it yet. At that point, all I knew that I was leaving everything familiar behind. And that terrified me. Because as bad as things had been, at least I knew how to survive them. What I didn't know was whether I could survive what came next. The summer between 5th and 6th grade didn't feel like a break. It felt like a suspension. Like my life had been paused somewhere in the middle of a sentence, and I wasn't sure how or if it was going to start again. I was leaving my friends, not gradually, not with a sense of shared transition, but abruptly. They would finish elementary school together, move on together, carry their shared history forward. I would not. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes from being separated from your timeline, from watching everyone else continue on a path you were supposed to be on, knowing you've been redirected somewhere else entirely. And I was being redirected into the unknown. A new school, new people, a new version of myself I didn't yet know how to be. But underneath all of that, deeper, quieter, more consuming, was the thing I carried with me everywhere, the thing I couldn't talk about, the thing I couldn't hide. I wet the bed. Even now those words feel heavy. Back then they were unbearable. Every morning started the same way. The moment of waking, that brief second of disorientation, followed immediately by the realization, the feeling, the smell, the confirmation of what I already knew. And then the wave. Shame, guilt, confusion. Why was this happening to me? No one else I knew dealt with this. Not my sisters, not my friends, at least not that I was aware of. And in the absence of answers, the only conclusion I could come to was the simplest and most damaging one. There was something wrong with me. We went to the doctors, a lot of them. Each one had a theory, a treatment, a new approach that was supposed to be the one that finally worked. Some of the suggestions were questionable. My mother, thankfully, had a line she refused to cross. She protected me from the worst of it, even when she was just as desperate for a solution as I was. At one point, I was given a small red pill to take every night. It was sugar-coated, almost identical to a tiny Sudafed. I never knew exactly what it was supposed to do. Looking back, I'm fairly certain it wasn't meant to do much of anything. I think it was hope disguised as medicine. It didn't change a thing. What it did change was my awareness, my hypervigilance, my need to control something that refused to be controlled. Sleepovers became strategic operations. I was invited to plenty, but I only accepted 2. Danny Gold's house worked out because of the television in his room. We would stay up late, sometimes all night, watching horror movies that were just scary enough to keep us awake. Exhaustion was the lesser of 2 evils. The other safe place was the home of Randy and Tony Wingate. Their mother, Bunny, knew. She never made it a conversation, never pulled me aside, never made me feel like I was something that needed to be handled. She simply prepared. Plastic cover on the mattress, a quiet routine in the morning, sheets removed, washed, replaced, without comment, without judgment. That kind of grace is rare and unforgettable. My friends, to their credit, never exposed me. They protected me in the only way they could, by saying nothing. But silence doesn't erase fear, and nothing brought that fear to the surface like the idea of being away from home. Which is why sleepaway camp felt less like an opportunity and more like a sentence. When I was 9, my father decided it was time. A doctor had likely suggested it, a belief that immersion, independence, maybe even a little pressure would force the issue, that I would grow out of it. If I had no choice. I remember sitting in the den as my parents told me. I didn't try to be brave. I didn't try to negotiate. I broke. I cried. I pleaded. I told them in no uncertain terms that my life would be over if they sent me. They assured me everything had been handled. There would be a counselor, someone who knew, someone who would help. His name was Ray. Ray turned out to be friendly enough, big guy, easy smile, the kind of person you assume you can trust. But whatever plan had been made on paper never materialized in reality. I saw Ray only when I got into trouble. That was it. The camp itself was exactly as I had feared. Barracks, rows of beds, a system that prioritized order over privacy. We were told to grab mattresses from a pile, stale, worn, already carrying the weight of whoever had used them before. I chose my spot like someone planning a defensive position. Against the wall, near the door, fewer angles, better airflow, less exposure. It didn't matter. The first night I stayed awake. The second night I tried to. By the third, my body made the decision for me. I woke up in a wet sleeping bag. Panic kicked in immediately, but it was controlled panic. Focused, tactical. I moved quickly, quietly, rolled the bag, flipped the mattress, hid what I could. Gym shorts became my nightly uniform, thanks to my mother's foresight. For a few days I managed, but survival has a cost. By day 4 or 5 I was exhausted, not just physically but mentally. Every day, every second of every day, was spent managing the secret, anticipating exposure, planning contingencies. It consumed me. So I tried to escape. I faked illness. Recalling an episode of emergency, I decided to pretend my appendix had burst. I marched into the nurse's office and recited symptoms like I was auditioning for a role. They let me stay the night. By morning, I was sent back. I tried again, different symptoms, different angles. Nothing worked. At one point, I threw myself into stinging nettles, hoping the reaction would be dramatic enough to warrant removal. All I got was an itch. And the same result, nothing. Eventually, the last day arrived. We were told to stack our mattresses. As I lifted mine, the stain was there, impossible to hide, impossible to ignore. The reaction was immediate. Pointing, laughter, recognition. I didn't fight it. I didn't run. I just stood there and let it happen. Then I got on the bus and sat through the longest 2 hours of my life. When we arrived, my mother was there. How was it? She asked. I looked at her and said, as calmly as I could, don't ever do that to me again. What I didn't say, what I couldn't yet put into words, was how far down I felt I had fallen. Something in me had shifted at camp, or maybe it had broken. I didn't feel like one of the kids anymore. I didn't feel like a kid. I felt lower than that. So I made a decision. For the rest of that summer, I was going to be a dog. It sounds absurd now, but at the time it made perfect sense to me. Dogs didn't have expectations. They didn't get graded. They didn't have to explain themselves or carry around shame or something they couldn't control. Dogs just were. So that's what I became. Every night I slept outside with our dogs, not as a game, not as a phase I talked about or joked about. I meant it. I laid down beside them under the open sky, and that's where I stayed. It horrified my mother. I could see it in her eyes, even when she tried to hide it. This wasn't just a kid acting out. This was something deeper, something she couldn't quite reach. She took me to a doctor. The doctor told her it wouldn't last, that it was a response, a way of processing something I didn't have the tools to understand yet. That if she didn't fight it, if she let it run its course, I would find my way back. So she did something remarkable. She let me be. She didn't drag me back inside. She didn't shame me. She didn't try to force me into being something I didn't feel like I was anymore. She waited, and slowly as the summer wore on, something began to shift. Not all at once, not dramatically, but little by little, as the idea of the new school became more real, as the fear started to share space with something else, something like possibility, I began to come back. Back inside, back to myself. Back to feeling like a person again. By the time school started, I wasn't fully there yet, but I wasn't a dog anymore. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I had a chance to become something more. The next chapter of my life began at Park Century School. And everything changed the moment I walked in. My teacher, Hollis David, didn't see a problem to fix. She saw a person to understand. That alone was enough to disarm me. On my first day, she introduced me to Adam Seligman. Adam was standing in the sandbox dragging a magnet through the sand. What are you doing? I asked. Getting the graphite out, he said, without looking up. It was such a specific, focused answer that it immediately drew me in. But then I noticed everything else, the sounds, the movements, the pops that he was making with his lips, the way his body seemed to interrupt itself without warning. I didn't understand it, so I asked. He looked at me, really looked, and then said calmly, "They're tics. I have a neurological disorder called Tourette's syndrome. No hesitation, no apology, just truth." And just like that, the unknown disappeared. Okay, I said. And I sat down next to him. That was the beginning of a friendship, of a shift, of a new understanding, not just of him, but of myself. We stayed in that sandbox for years, sometimes literally, eventually metaphorically, until his death in 1998. Looking back now, I can see it clearly. That moment, simple as it was, changed everything. Because it taught me something I had never been shown before. Understanding replaces fear. Acceptance replaces shame. And sometimes all it takes to start the transformation is someone willing to tell the truth and someone else willing to say, okay, cool. You know, it's funny. When I look back on that kid, the one sitting in that classroom or lying awake at camp or sleeping outside because he didn't feel like a person anymore. I wish I could go back and tell him something simple, that he wasn't broken, that he wasn't behind, that he just hadn't been seen yet. And the truth is, there's still a lot of kids out there like that. Kids who are trying, kids who are struggling, kids who are being told directly or indirectly that they don't get it. At the Ed Asner Family Center, that's exactly who we're here for. Not to fix them, but to see them, to meet them where they are, to help them build confidence, community, and a sense of who they actually are, not who the world told them they were. And I was lucky. I eventually found teachers who saw me, friends who understood me, a path that made sense. Not every kid gets that. So if this story hit home for you, whether it's your story, your child's story, or someone you care about, I hope it reminds you of something important. Understanding changes everything. And if you connected with this episode, it really helps us if you hit like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear it. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on the Brady Bunch of Autism.